So just quickly, the importance of GraphQL. This is old news to some of you and interesting to others. The GraphQL is a specification that really has a lot of benefits over the traditional, and I say traditional, we're talking 8-9 years ago, but the traditional REST API JSON endpoints. There's a lot of benefits include the fact that it's as an endpoint, it's self-documenting. So documenting JSON, and there's all kinds of technologies that have been built around just the fact of documenting JSON and JSON endpoints. GraphQL has the benefit of being self-documenting, which means you can query the GraphQL endpoint and it can tell you what it's capable of doing. The other feature in GraphQL that's extremely important is that it allows you not to overfetch. So when you call the dotCMS API, a lot of times you get back a lot more than you bargained for, and a lot of sort of metadata around the content when you're really just looking for the title, the image, and the body. In GraphQL, you get to specify exactly what you want to get back from the client side at runtime. And in dotCMS, what we're doing is we're basically mapping our content types, our base types, to a GraphQL interface. When what that means, it means you can query all file assets regardless of their base type together as a collection. Same thing with content or personas or HTML pages, and then each content type itself becomes a collection, so that you can query each particular content type as a collection, and finally you can just perform a query across the entire content repository, just like you can with Elasticsearch-based querying. So dotCMS generates the schema, the GraphQL schema on the fly when content types are modified. And like all things in dotCMS, it doesn't take a lick of Java coding in order to generate the schema. The dotCMS takes care of that for you automatically based upon the definition of the content types. Once your types are modified, GraphQL rebuilds the schema and allows people to query based upon the new properties that are found. It's a very important, I think GraphQL is a very important direction for the future of dotCMS APIs, and is going to become more and more important. At this time in 5.1, we really only support querying the content repository using GraphQL, and we in the future will begin to explore allowing to do what are called mutations, which is allowing content to be modified using GraphQL, being able to do updates or deletes on content objects, and even potentially using GraphQL to define the entire content schema. There's a lot we can do with GraphQL in a lot of directions, and we can expose, through GraphQL, we can expose all different facets of our system as queryable endpoints through a single interface. It's an exciting technology. Whole companies are being built around it and being driven by it, and our content repository really lends itself, the complete separation of content from the presentation of that content, it really lends itself to acting as a full content repo accessible by GraphQL. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk through connecting to dotCMS GraphQL endpoint. The first thing we need to do in order to do that is we need an access token. So let me request an access token from my local dotCMS, and this is passing in my username and password and saying I want this token to expire in 1,000 days, and I'll take that access token, and we will say this is a new request, and we'll say that our auth is going to be the bearer token, which is what the JOT access token is, and we save that. And then we have to put in our endpoint, and the endpoint for GraphQL is API v1 GraphQL. And then we'll select here that we want to do a GraphQL query, right? And so the first thing that this will do right out of the box is, based on that endpoint, we'll go ahead and fetch the GraphQL schema. And this is what I was talking about GraphQL being self-documenting. So what that means is now this tool can start doing autocomplete, right? So for example, I can start typing my query, and let's say I want to query news articles in dotCMS, right? I can say, okay, I'm going to query the news collection. Every content type has a quote-unquote collection, which is going to have all of the content of its type, and I can query the news content type. So I can say, okay, I want where title is like gas star. And these queries here, this is just an Elasticsearch Lucene query. So the same queries that you use to drive your queries on the front end or even via APIs, this GraphQL will accept the same exact query language there, right? So it makes it very easy to translate your queries from one API endpoint or from Velocity to GraphQL. I can also say I only want, let's say I want a limit of 10, and let's say we want to sort by mod date. So then what I can do here, and what this is going to do for me, because we have the schema, it's going to allow me to select from the fields that I want to return. So let's say I want to return we'll return the title, we'll return the byline, and we'll return the lead, right? And so if I send that query off, you can see here that this is going to return exactly what I asked for. It's going to return the title, the byline, the lead of the news content type. Now, the beauty of GraphQL is you can begin to query other objects within the repository. So, for example, this host folder field here, this field here has multiple properties, right? It has a folder path. We can have the host name, host aliases. We can get back just about anything, any property that's available for that host folder field. And likewise, if we say image, so this is querying on a news article, an image is a binary field. We can get the path. We can also get the name, and let's get the size, right? And so we send that off, and you can see here now I have a nested graph of our content. Right, so let's explore how some of these other fields, because you know the thing about GraphQL is each field on a particular content type or content object can return not only just a single value, but can return a set of values. And in the case, for example, of relationships, can return an entire collection of the related content, or you can go down the graph of relationships using GraphQL. But I want to show, we talked a little bit about the host folder and this image, the binary field here, but for example, categories. So categories, you can retrieve this is a news article, you can retrieve the inode of the category, you can retrieve the name and the velocity variable of any given category, right? So if you send that, you can see here that this BlackBerry Goes cross-platform has been categorized under research, right? Or tags. You can get back tags, and tags is going to return to you a list of how the piece of content has been tagged. Each of the different fields within a piece of content can return different properties. A folder, for example, is going to have a path, and you can get back basically all the different properties on a given folder in dotCMS. So you can get the folder title or the name or what have you. You can also do a broader query. Like, so let's say you wanted to do, I guess, what we call a join, right? What you can do is you can say, I want to query content types news and employee, right? And for both of them, I want to pull the title and identifier. And if it's a news article, I want to pull the URL and the byline. Otherwise, let's just do the byline actually. And otherwise, if it's an employee, I want the first name and the last name, right? So if I send that query off, you can see here what it's doing. It's doing a join. It's pulling all the news content, all the employee content, and then based upon what the piece of content is, it's going to return the fields on that piece of content. So you can query multiple types of content within a single query, and for each of them, pull back the fields and the properties that you want to see for that given piece of content. And that about wraps it up with what we have to show today on GraphQL. But we're real excited about it in 5.1, and it's only going to improve on an ongoing basis throughout the releases. But it is really quite powerful and performant even today on its initial iteration.